I thought I'd seen everything when it came to HOA drama, but Karen Whitmore proved me wrong. As the self-appointed president of our Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, she had turned neighborhood management into her personal kingdom. What started as a simple landscaping dispute ended with her demanding I pay her personal electric bill and calling 911 when I refused. It all began 3 months ago when I moved into this supposedly peaceful suburban neighborhood. The houses were nice, with well-manicured lawns and modern architecture that screamed suburban bliss. The streets were clean, lined with mature trees and sidewalks perfect for evening strolls, and the HOA fees seemed reasonable. Nothing that raised immediate alarms during my home search. What I didn't know was that Karen had been running the association like her own personal empire for the past 5 years, with virtually no oversight from other board members who had long since given up trying to reason with her. They had resigned themselves to her iron-fisted control, avoiding confrontations that could disrupt their own lives. The first red flag came during my initial walkthrough of the neighborhood rules. I was still unpacking boxes, surrounded by the chaos of moving, cardboard stacks in the living room, furniture half assembled, and the faint scent of fresh paint lingering in the air, when Karen appeared at my front door. She was a middle-aged woman with perfectly pressed khakis and a crisp polo shirt, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, clipboard in hand like a weapon. She introduced herself with a tight smile, explaining how she had enhanced the community standards during her tenure as president. Now, as you can see in section 12.4, she said, flipping through the pages of a 3-inch binder with the precision of a drill sergeant, lawn maintenance must be performed every Saturday between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. No exceptions. I personally inspect every yard on Sunday mornings to ensure compliance. I raised an eyebrow at this, feeling a twinge of unease. The original HOA documents, which I had reviewed carefully before closing on the house, said lawn care should be maintained regularly, but they didn't specify exact days or times. It was vague enough to allow flexibility for busy homeowners. Karen's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly as if sensing my doubt. Well, I've improved upon those outdated guidelines. These new rules have been implemented for the betterment of our community property values. Her voice carried an authoritative tone, laced with a sense of superiority that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That should have been my warning to document everything, from emails to conversations, but I naively thought I could handle one overzealous HOA president. I was wrong. This was just the beginning of her overreach. The real trouble started when I hired a landscaping company to install native plants in my front yard. I had done my research thoroughly, poring over city ordinances late into the night, obtaining the proper permits from the local municipal office, and even double-checking the original HOA covenants to ensure everything was compliant. The native plants were drought-resistant, beautiful additions that would thrive in California's climate. Vibrant California poppies with their orange blooms swaying in the breeze, fragrant lavender bushes attracting pollinators, and low-maintenance succulents that conserved water. They were perfectly legal according to every official document I could find, promoting sustainability in a region prone to droughts. Karen showed up the morning after the installation, her face flushed with righteous indignation, as if I'd committed a personal affront. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the freshly turned soil, when she marched up my driveway. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pointing accusingly at my newly planted garden, her voice sharp and echoing slightly in the quiet morning air. I stepped outside, the cool grass under my feet, holding my copy of the HOA documents like a shield. According to the covenants, homeowners can plant any drought-resistant native species. These California poppies and lavender bushes meet all the requirements, I explained calmly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Those covenants are old," she snapped, pulling out her ever-present clipboard with a flourish. "I've created updated landscaping guidelines that require pre-approval for any changes. You need to remove these immediately and replant with approved grass varieties." Her words hung in the air, heavy with entitlement. "Show me where these updated guidelines were legally adopted by the HOA board," I said, my voice steady despite the growing frustration. Karen's eyes narrowed further, her grip tightening on the clipboard. "I am the HOA board. I make the decisions around here, and I'm telling you those plants need to go." That's when I realized I was dealing with someone who had completely lost sight of her actual authority. Karen had convinced herself that being HOA president meant she could create and enforce whatever rules she wanted, regardless of legal procedures or homeowner rights. Little did I know, this minor disagreement was about to spiral into a full-blown war of attrition. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated rapidly, turning my peaceful new home into a battlefield of petty grievances. Karen began leaving violation notices on my door almost daily, each one more creative and unfounded than the last. The notes were printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, complete with her signature in bold ink, and they arrived taped to my front door or slipped under the mat, often accompanied by the faint rustle of paper in the wind. She cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 30 minutes, a rule that existed nowhere in the documents, demanding I wheel them back immediately or face penalties. Another notice accused me of parking my car in my own driveway during inappropriate hours, claiming it disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the cul-de-sac. And then there were the curtains. She insisted they were allegedly the wrong shade of white, too cream, instead of pure, and fined me for diminishing curb appeal. Each violation came with increasingly steep fines that had no basis in the actual HOA documents, amounts scribbled in red pen that grew from $50 to hundreds overnight. When I ignored these made-up penalties, crumpling the notices and tossing them into the recycling bin, Karen's anger reached new heights. She started showing up at my house multiple times a day, her footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway as she circled my property like a predator. She'd take photos from different angles, snapping shots of the garden, the driveway, even the windows, her camera clicking incessantly, and leave lengthy handwritten notes about my continued defiance of community standards. The notes were rambling, filled with phrases like willful disregard and threat to property values, her handwriting increasingly frantic. The breaking point came when I received a bill in my mailbox for $437.62. It wasn't an HOA fee or a fine for some imaginary violation, it was Karen's personal electric bill from Pacific Gas and Electric, complete with itemized charges for usage, and a sticky note attached in her neat script. Your non-compliance has forced me to work extra hours managing your violations. You owe me for the additional electricity used in my home office. I actually laughed out loud when I saw it, standing in my kitchen with the paper in hand, the absurdity hitting me like a wave. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. How could someone rationalize billing a neighbor for their own utility costs? I knocked on her door that afternoon, the bill clutched firmly, the suburban street quiet except for distant lawnmowers. Karen answered, wearing rubber gloves that squeaked as she adjusted them, holding a spray bottle mid-clean, clearly in the middle of one of her obsessive cleaning sessions. The scent of lemon cleaner wafted out. I believe you accidentally put this in my mailbox, I said, holding up her electric bill, trying to keep my tone neutral. Karen's face lit up with satisfaction, a smug grin spreading as she set down the bottle. Oh, no. That's correct. As I explained in my note, your deliberate violations have created additional work for me. I've had to spend countless hours documenting your infractions, researching penalty structures, and corresponding with various city departments about your non-compliance. My home office electricity usage has increased significantly. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the mental gymnastics required to reach this conclusion, the way she twisted her own harassment into a billable service. Karen, you cannot bill homeowners for your personal utility costs. That's not how HOA management works, I replied, my voice firming with irritation. She continued, completely ignoring my response, her eyes gleaming with conviction. According to my calculations, you owe me for 3 months of increased electricity usage plus a processing fee for the additional administrative burden. Payment is due within 10 business days, or I'll be forced to take legal action. I'm not paying your electric bill, I said firmly, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. This is harassment, and you need to stop. Karen's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to cold fury, her cheeks flushing red. We'll see about that, she hissed before slamming the door in my face, the impact echoing through the frame. I should have known she wouldn't let it go, but I underestimated just how far she was willing to take her delusions of authority. 2 days later, I was working from home, my laptop open on the dining table amid scattered papers, when I heard sirens approaching the neighborhood. The wailing grew louder, piercing the afternoon calm, and I looked out my window to see a police car pull up directly in front of my house, lights flashing blue and red. 2 officers got out and walked to my front door, their boots thudding on the porch. Behind them, Karen emerged from her house across the street, practically bouncing with excitement as she hurried over, her arms pumping like she was in a race. I opened the door before they could knock, the cool air from inside mixing with the warm outside breeze. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" I asked, my heart pounding slightly from the unexpected intrusion. The older officer, a patient-looking man in his 50s with a weathered face and a notepad in hand, consulted his notes. "We received a call about theft of services and refusal to pay legally mandated fees. The caller claims you owe money to the Homeowners Association and are refusing to pay." I glanced at Karen, who was standing behind the officers with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on her face, her clipboard tucked under one arm like a trophy. "I'm current on all my HOA fees," I said calmly, pulling up the payment confirmation on my phone to show them. "My automatic payment went through just last week." "That's not what this is about," Karen interjected, stepping forward eagerly, her voice rising with indignation. "He owes me $437.62 for additional administrative costs related to his ongoing violations. When someone refuses to pay legally mandated fees, that's theft of services." The younger officer looked confused, scratching his head. "Ma'am, are you saying he owes the Homeowners Association this money?" "He owes it to me personally," Karen clarified, her tone matter of fact, "for the extra work his violations have caused. I had to use additional electricity in my home office to manage his case." Both officers exchanged glances, and I could see the exact moment they realized what they were dealing with, the absurdity sinking in. The older officer cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ma'am, we can't arrest someone for refusing to pay your personal electric bill. That's a civil matter between private parties, not a criminal issue." Karen's face turned red, her composure cracking. "But he's stealing services. I provided administrative work, and he's refusing to pay for it." "Did he request this administrative work?" the younger officer asked, his brow furrowing. "Well, no, but did he sign any agreement to pay for your services?" "Not exactly, but then this is not a criminal matter," the older officer said firmly, his patience thinning. "If you believe someone owes you money for services, you need to take it up in small claims court. We cannot make arrests based on personal billing disputes." "But I'm the HOA president," she protested, her voice pitching higher. "I have the authority to assess fees and penalties." "Ma'am," the older officer said with barely concealed irritation, "being HOA president doesn't give you the right to bill residents for your personal expenses. If you continue to make false reports, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services." After the officers left, their car pulling away with a final flash of lights, Karen stood in my driveway for several minutes, staring at my house with a mixture of rage and disbelief, her fists clenched at her sides. I watched from my window as she finally stalked back to her own property, muttering angrily to herself, her shadow lengthening in the setting sun. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen's humiliation only made her more determined to prove her authority. Over the next week, she ramped up her harassment campaign to absurd levels, the notices piling up like autumn leaves. She cited me for aggressive landscaping choices that intimidate neighbors, displaying non-approved outdoor furniture, a simple bench, and maintaining a driveway that reflects sunlight in a disruptive manner. The fines she invented grew increasingly outrageous. $500 for environmental noncompliance, $750 for architectural insubordination, and $1,000 for willful disregard of community harmony standards. When I continued to ignore her made-up penalties, Karen escalated to what she probably thought was her nuclear option. She called 911 again, this time claiming I was destroying community property values through malicious noncompliance and demanding my immediate arrest for grand theft of neighborhood equity. The same 2 officers responded, and this time they were noticeably less patient, their expressions hardened. "Ma'am, this is the 3rd time this month you've called us about civil disputes with your neighbor," the older officer said sternly, his voice echoing in the street. "We've explained that these are not criminal matters." "But he's causing thousands of dollars in damage to our property values," Karen insisted, her hands gesturing wildly. "That has to be some kind of vandalism or destruction of property." "Having plants you don't like is not vandalism," the younger officer replied dryly. "And property values are not community property that someone can steal." That's when I decided it was time to take action. Karen had clearly lost all sense of reality, and her harassment was interfering with my ability to enjoy my own home. Constant anxiety, disrupted sleep, and a growing pile of documentation. I had recorded every violation notice, every made-up fine, and every interaction we'd had, building a dossier of evidence. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA operations, detailing her abuses. I also filed a harassment complaint with the local police department and sent a certified letter to every homeowner in the association, outlining Karen's unauthorized rule changes and her attempts to collect personal payments from residents. The response was swift and devastating. It turned out that several other homeowners had been dealing with Karen's made-up rules and arbitrary fines, but they had been too intimidated to speak up, suffering in silence. Once they learned they weren't alone, a revolt began, whispers turning into open discussions at mailboxes and over fences. Within 2 weeks, enough homeowners had signed a petition to call for an emergency board meeting and a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. The Department of Real Estate launched an investigation into her unauthorized rule changes and her attempts to collect personal payments. The emergency board meeting was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center, a modest building with folding chairs and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Nearly every homeowner in the association showed up, the room packed with murmurs of frustration. Karen arrived looking confident, her binder and clipboard in tow, apparently believing she could talk her way out of the situation. "I don't understand why everyone is so upset," she began, standing at the front of the room, her voice projecting authority. "Everything I've done has been for the betterment of our community. These enhanced guidelines have maintained our property values and our neighborhood standards." One by one, homeowners stood up to share their experiences, the air thick with pent-up anger. Mrs. Peterson from Oak Street had been fined $800 for having insufficiently cheerful garden decorations, gnomes that were deemed too whimsical. Mr. Rodriguez received violation notices for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight, claiming it lowered the tone. The Johnsons had been cited for having children's toys visible in their backyard for more than 2 hours per day, disrupting visual serenity. As the stories piled up, Karen's face grew paler and paler, her interruptions growing desperate as she tried to explain how each rule was necessary for community standards, but her explanations only made her look more delusional and out of touch. The final blow came when I stood up and read aloud from her electric bill demand, explaining in detail how she had called 911 twice trying to have me arrested for refusing to pay her personal utility costs. "This is what happens when someone loses sight of their actual authority," I concluded, my voice steady amid the nods of agreement. "Karen has turned HOA management into her personal power trip, and it's time for it to end." The vote wasn't even close. Karen was removed from the HOA board by a margin of 43-2, with only herself and her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hartwell, voting in her favor. The room erupted in applause, a collective sigh of relief. But the real consequences were just beginning. The Department of Real Estate's investigation found that Karen had violated multiple state regulations governing HOA operations. She had created unauthorized rules without proper board approval, attempted to collect unauthorized fees, and misrepresented her authority to homeowners. The penalties were severe, a $15,000 fine for regulatory violations, plus an additional $5,000 for each homeowner who had paid her unauthorized fees. Since 7 families had actually paid some of her made-up fines over the years, that brought her total penalty to $50,000. Karen was also banned from serving on any HOA board in the state for 10 years and required to pay restitution to every homeowner who had been affected by her unauthorized rules. When the Department of Real Estate agent read the penalties aloud at the follow-up meeting, in the same community center now filled with a sense of justice, Karen's face went completely white, her hands trembling. $50,000, she whispered. her voice barely audible over the murmurs. I don't have that kind of money. I was just trying to help the community. Her words fell flat, a final echo of her shattered empire, as the neighborhood finally reclaimed its peace.